begin our class this morning. If everyone could be making their way to their seats. We've got about a minute before class starts, but we can go ahead and be making our way to our seats. Good to see everyone here this morning. Thankful for those that are streaming with us on YouTube. Thankful for that technology. And we have a good number with us this morning in our class. Ask everyone if they would open their Bibles to the book of Luke. Luke chapter 5, verses 33 is where we begin. We'll be closing out this chapter, our study through the book of Luke. This particular chapter we noted is an emphasis on faith. It begins with what is often referred to as the great catch or the great drought of fish. There we see faith following the apostles, those men who would become apostles. Peter, Andrew, who is unmentioned, but we know he was a part of that particular circumstance. James and John, who are mentioned, they were called to follow Jesus. After that, we see there was a man who was a leper, and so there we see faith requesting. He requested that Jesus would cleanse him of his leprosy. After the leper, there was a man who was sick of the palsy. He was a paralytic, and his friends bring him to Jesus. And so we see their faith seeking, and it's emphasized there, the faith that they had, not only the man who was a paralytic, but those four who brought him to Jesus. And beginning with verse 27, we have the call of, Luke has it as Levi. That's Matthew. We know him more often as. He was sitting at the seat of custom. That is, he was at the custom house or the place of tax collection. There we have faith abandoning, we emphasized last week. He also, like Peter, James, and John, followed Jesus. But it says that he followed. The idea there is abandonment, and he abandoned the life that he had had before for the life of a disciple following Jesus. We come next to verse 33. Verses 33 through 39, I've given the title of Faith Understanding. Faith Understanding. Here we have, what we're going to find is the Pharisees come. Matthew and Mark identify not only are the Pharisees present asking this question, but the disciples of John are also present. And the question is regarding fasting and prayer. Chiefly, fasting is what's addressed here. Jesus gives some explanation. Then he speaks, verse 36, it's unique. It says, and he spake also a parable unto them. Then there's two or three different things that are mentioned. But it's identified, all of this is identified as a parable. So one particular thought or point being made here, we're going to see some of the things that are often said concerning this particular parable. It's my judgment in the context, this parable relates to the question that was asked concerning the fasting and prayer, specifically the fasting, which is absurdity. Okay, that's the point that's being made here. Jesus is emphasizing the absurdity of the question that was asked. It's just as absurd as A, just as absurd as B. That's the point that he's going to be making here in the close of this chapter. So let's begin here with in Luke chapter 5, 33 through 39. If you would, bow with me before we get into the text, and we'll have a word of prayer. Our God and our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy great and holy name. Father, we come before thee thankful for every good and every perfect gift thou hast given unto us. Especially, Father, are we thankful for the gift of thine only begotten Son, for his sacrifice that he gave on the cross, that we, through the pouring out of his blood, might have remission of sins, and this great privilege and even a right to call thee Father and to approach thy throne in prayer. Father, we are thankful for this Lord's Day, for the opportunity that we have to gather together as Christians to worship thee, to study from thy word. Father, as we begin now our hour of Bible study, we pray that we will empty our minds of things that are outside of these walls that pertain to the world. We would concentrate wholly on our studies, and that as our knowledge increases, that our faith would be greatly strengthened. Our prayer in Jesus Christ, thy Son's name. Amen. All right, let's read together Luke chapter 5, 33 through 39. Let's get the context of this question that's asked. Then the reply or the parable that ties in with this. Then we'll go back and we'll make some comments. And they said unto him, why do the disciples of John fast often and make prayers, and likewise the disciples of the Pharisees, but thine eat and drink? He said unto them, can you make the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? Now, the wording that he uses here and this illustration especially is going to be understood by the disciples of John. And again, it's pointed out in the parallel passages that they are present. But the days will come, or I think maybe the American Standard says, but the day will come. And then that is a separate standalone phrase. But the day will come, that is, the day of fasting will come. There's going to be a time, it's not now when they should be fasting, but there is a time coming that they will fast. When the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast in those days. And he spake also a parable unto them. No man putteth a piece of a new garment on an old. If otherwise, then both the new maketh a rent, and the piece that was taken out of the new agreeth not with the old. And no man putteth new wine in old bottles, else the new wine would burst the bottles, and be spilled, and the bottle shall perish. But new wine must first be put into new bottles, and both are preserved. No man also, having drunk old wine, straightway desireth new, for he saith, the old is better. All right, now, there are some lessons and applications that we can draw from this parable or these parables here. But again, I believe in the context, this refers back to the answer that Jesus gives. And we'll see as we go further. All right, let's go back to verse 33. Why do the disciples of John often fast? And so they said unto him, in Matthew chapter 9 and verse 14, we see that the disciples of John are present, and they ask this question. Okay, the disciples of John are there. They ask the question, in essence, why do your disciples fast, or not fast, or make prayer, but we are? Okay, these are those disciples that continue to follow John. Think of John chapter 1. In John chapter 1, verse 29, John says, behold the Lamb of God that taketh away the sin of the world. He expounds on that thought. Then we see that one of his disciples and Andrew, and so Andrew and John, they began to follow Jesus. They follow him. They ask the question. Jesus says, what seek ye? They ask him where he dwells. Jesus says, come and see. Okay? They had been disciples of John, following John, listening to John's teaching. When John pointed to Jesus, they left following John and started following Jesus. Some disciples, some of those that had followed John, continued following him. Okay? Perhaps even working with him. And so Matthew identifies that it is the disciples of John that asked the question. But then in Mark 2 and verse 18, Mark identifies that both the disciples of John and the Pharisees being present is kind of a group type question. All right? So you've got a full picture when you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so the question, why do we fast often and make prayers? Here's a question. Did Jesus fast? Sure he did. According to the law. Did Jesus pray? We know he did. We have records of Jesus praying. In fact, in the book of Luke, more than any of the other gospel accounts, more than Matthew, more than Mark, more than John, we see Jesus praying more often in the book of Luke than any of the others. In fact, prayer is mentioned more often than any of the other gospel accounts. It is a book of prayer. But that's the question. Why do your disciples not fast often like we do? And why do they not pray like we do? It's not the fact that they don't fast at all. It's they don't fast the way we do. It's not the fact that they don't pray at all, but they don't pray the way that we do. The idea of fasting. How often were the Jews, according to the law of Moses, supposed to fast? Anyone know? How many times a year? How many times a month? How many times a week? Look at Luke chapter 18. And we need to have an understanding of the culture and the setting and what's taking place here to really know what's the purpose of this question. All right. And what is perhaps on the Pharisees' side of things cast a bad light on the disciples of Jesus. From the disciples of John, the idea is a better understanding of what's going on. Okay? Now look at Luke chapter 18, and let's start with verse 9. And he spake this parable unto them, unto certain which trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee, the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. Now look at this. I fast twice in the week. All right, now there's identified for us how often the Pharisees, fasted. 2 times a week. How many times is that a year? If you just do 2 times a week. 104, right? Our 52-week calendar, their calendar was different. But for us, that'd be 104 times. How often, according to the law of Moses, were they supposed to fast? Once a year. Leviticus chapter 16, we have the record of the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement was the day that a sacrifice was brought to the priest, 2 animals actually, and a sacrifice was made for the nation as a whole. On that day, the nation as a whole were supposed to fast. That is the only fast commanded by the law of Moses. They were not supposed to fast 2 days a week. Yes, sir. The main reason for the fasting there is from Leviticus 16 because it was commanded by God. It seems to me the primary motivation or a purpose or reason for the fasting, if I'm not focused on eating, then I can put my focus and attention on spiritual things. This is a day that is to be focused on spiritual things, the Day of Atonement. A sacrifice is being offered for the atonement for all of the nation. The focus of the whole nation should be on spiritual things today. Therefore, fast today. Okay. We read in Acts chapter 6, the apostles said, we'll give ourselves to fasting and prayer. Spiritual things, okay? They can focus on spiritual things. So I believe that's more of a general sense or purpose with regards to reasons for fasting. This publican, now let's back into the text. Leviticus 16, according to the law, you fast once a year. Now, that doesn't mean you can't fast any other time of the year. You can fast, not necessarily any time you want to. Were there some days where you were not allowed to fast? What about the Passover? On the day of the Passover, you were supposed to eat. What if I say, you know what? We're back under the law of Moses. It's the Passover. I'm going to fast today. I can't fast according to the law of Moses because I have to participate in this. There were certain days you couldn't fast. Okay? Now, Jesus is going to make a point. Now, there are certain days you can't fast, but there are also certain days that would be ridiculous to fast. We're going to see that here in just a moment. But back to Luke chapter 18. This publican says, I fast twice in a week. Why? Why does he fast twice a week, every week? And I can tell you what days it was on. He fasted on Monday and he fasted on Thursday. We know that based on secular writings. Okay, that was part of the tradition of the Jews. When did Moses go up into the Mount Sinai? Tradition is he went up on a Thursday. Now, he's gone for 40 days. Okay, when did he come down? Tradition was he came down on a Monday. According to our calendar, he goes up on a Thursday, he comes down on a Monday. Those must be particular special days. At least it was to the Pharisees, to the Jews. Therefore, they fasted on Monday, they fasted on Tuesday. When the Pharisee in Luke 18 says, I fast twice a week, I fast according to the traditions. Yes, he fasted on the Day of Atonement. His minimum fasting time a year was 105 days. The Pharisees are coming up to Jesus and to his disciples, how come you're disciples aren't as religious as we are? How come they're not as spiritual as we are? We fast twice every week. They don't. You don't. Why not? That is the question being asked. Okay? Why do they not fast as often as we? Well, one reason it wasn't commanded by law, that was left up to whoever. Jesus does not condemn fasting. He doesn't oppose fasting. What he does is oppose and condemn the abuse of it. Matthew chapter 6, when you fast, don't make yourself look like you fast. That's what the religious leaders would do. They would make themselves appear to be very hungry. That, hey, I'm so religious, look at what my fasting has done to me. Don't do that. So Jesus opposed and condemned the abuse of it. He also opposed and condemned the abuse of prayer. Whenever you pray, don't go stand in the street where everybody can hear what you're saying and see what you're doing. That's not the purpose of it. You go and do that in secret. When you fast, do it where nobody knows. And whenever you pray, do that where nobody knows. Okay? That's what Jesus taught. Look at verse 34. We've got the idea of the question. What's the motivation of that? Verse 34, here's Jesus' response to this. Can you make the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? Now, go to John chapter 3. John chapter 3. And let's notice something here that John himself says. John the Baptist, that is. Let's start at verse 25. John 3:25. And this is why I said earlier, Jesus' response here with regards to the bridegroom and the friends or sons of the bride chamber, friends of the bridegroom. Okay? Verse 25 of John 3. Then there arose a question among some of John's disciples and the Jews about purifying. And they came unto John and said unto him, Rabbi, he that was with thee beyond Jordan, to whom thou bearest witness, behold, the same baptized, all men come to him. John answered and said, a man can receive nothing except it be given him from heaven. Okay, he's doing what God has told him to do. You yourselves bear witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but that I'm sent before him. I'm not the Messiah. I just am sent to prepare his way. Now look at verse 29. He that hath the bride is the bridegroom, the Christ. I prepared the way for the Messiah. He's the bridegroom. Now watch this. But the friend of the bridegroom, which standeth and heareth him, rejoiceth greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. This my joy, therefore, is fulfilled. He's the bridegroom. I'm a friend of the bridegroom. I'm not the bridegroom. I'm not the Christ. I'm not the Messiah. I'm just a friend of his. Then verse 30, he must increase, but I must decrease. Now, John's disciples had heard, and apparently there in that text in John 3, even the Pharisees heard John refer to Jesus as the bridegroom. Okay, and I'm just a friend of the bridegroom. Whenever Jesus says, can you make the children of the bride chamber, sons of the bride chamber, friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? That immediately triggered in their minds, wait, John referred to him as the bridegroom, so he is referring to himself as the bridegroom and all of his disciples in friends of the bridegroom. Because they said, why don't your disciples fast? I'm the bridegroom. Why should my friends be fasting when they're with me? Now, we have to understand the culture to understand that response. Who was the friend of the bridegroom in that culture? The wedding and the wedding feast, the wedding day would be something such as this. The friends of the bridegroom would escort the bridegroom to the house of the bride. They then would receive the bride and take the bride to her new home with the bridegroom. They then would deliver the bride and bridegroom to that home, but before they left, they would have a wedding feast. Okay? You'd have all of the wedding and you'd have a wedding feast. That feast might last a couple of days. That feast might last a week. Okay? There would be a wedding feast. Okay. James. James is the bridegroom. Emily, his bride. They have a great feast for all of the friends. Here's a question. How offended would James be if I'm at his wedding feast and I say, I'm not eating? How offended would you be if you invited my family to your house and you prepare a big meal and my family sits around your table after you have prepared all this food? We appreciate them. We're just here for for the visiting. We're not going to eat any of this. Well, why not? Well, I'm on a diet. I'm fasting. Whatever reason I give. You invite me and take me and my whole family out, and you order all of this food for me. You set it out there. Hey, I appreciate this, but I'm not going to eat that. Can you imagine how offensive that would be? Not only offensive, how ridiculous would it be? We're going to a wedding reception. Now, we'll be having a wedding reception here in a couple of weeks for my son Anthony. All right? Now, if you come to see Anthony and wish him well and say, hey, appreciate this food. You got some food here. We appreciate that. We're not going to eat. We're just here to see him for a little bit. We're going to go. You're not going to offend me. But why would you come to a gathering where food is offered, walk right by it and say, you know what, I'm going to walk right on by all this. I'm not going to have any of it. It's a bit ridiculous to do such a thing. That's what Jesus is saying. It is ridiculous. It is absurd to attend a wedding feast when you're fasting. Why would you do that? There is food prepared for you. That feast is going to last for days. It would be absurd to fast during a wedding feast. That's the point he's making. And he's applying that to his disciples. They are with the bridegroom. They have no reason to fast. Fasting was also an emphasis on sorrow. Why would they be sorrowful now? Well, there's no sorrow at a wedding feast. Everybody's joyful, and they're eating and enjoying one another and celebrating this. Why would they fast now? Okay? That's the point that Jesus is making here. Now, let's go to verse 36. With that thought, it is absurd for my disciples to fast now because the bridegroom is here. Look at verse 36. He spake also a parable unto them. No man putteth a piece of a new garment upon an old. If otherwise, then both the new maketh a rent, and the piece that was taken out of the new agreeth not with the old. Now, is there a lesson here with regard to the old law, old covenant, and the new law or the new covenant? You can make some application to that. You don't mix the old and the new. You don't take and put the old together with the new. It's a whole new covenant. The old wine and the new wine, the old wineskins and the new wineskins. In the next verse, verse 37, if you have fresh grape juice, the wine bottles or wine skins, they were animal skins. What happens whenever you take grape juice and put it into wine or put it into those skins and seal it up? Well, that as this grape juice ages, ferments, what's going to happen to it? It expands. Okay? This fresh skin is going to expand with it. What happens if you use wine skin that's already been used and has expanded already, and it's gotten older and brittle, and you put fresh grape juice in it? Whenever it begins to mature and ferment, it's going to do like it always does. It's going to cause whatever container it's in to expand, but it's old. Right? It's going to expand, it's going to bust, and the wine's going to leak out. You put brand new cloth. Here's a garment I've had for 10 years. It's been washed and dried many, many times. But I've got a hole in it. Well, here's a piece of new garment right here. Just sew it on that so it's cut out to the right shape, right form. It's sewed on. Then I'm going to wash that. Guess what's happened? That brand new piece of cloth is going to shrink because it hasn't been washed and dried. And whenever it shrinks, it's just going to rip and make that old piece of cloth, the rip's going to be worse than it was before you put the new piece on it. It's absurd to do something like that. It's absurd to put new wine in old wineskin. Jesus is just emphasizing the point. Why would they fast now? It's absurd for them to do that because I'm with them. But the time is coming. And here in Luke, this is the first hint of Jesus' death and his ascension. The day will come, the day of fasting will come for them whenever I am put to death. And then whenever I sin and I'm taken away from them. Then we see those disciples fasting. Faith, understanding. That's the point here. Jesus is giving some explanation as to why his disciples were not fasting according to that tradition. They could fast if they wanted to. There was no reason for them to. Joyful, not sorrow. The bridegroom is with them. All right. Any thoughts, any questions before we move on to chapter 6? Okay. Okay. Emphasis on understanding there, being able to give an answer. Okay. Anything else? All right. Luke chapter 6. With this chapter, as all the others, we're given a particular heading for this chapter. What's the general thought behind this chapter, or the overarching theme behind this? Luke chapter 6, I've given this the heading of Principles of Discipleship. Principles of Discipleship. There are a lot of things in chapter 6 that we see in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7 are known as what? Sermon on the Mount. Okay? Here we have a lot of the things in Luke that we will find in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7 and the Sermon on the Mount. Having read and studied Luke in some detail, I believe that one of the themes of Luke, there is an emphasis on discipleship. Maybe more than any of the other books. Yes, it is a record of the life of Jesus Christ. It is a record of his ministry. We have the record of the miracles that he performed, his death, his resurrection. But there is a great emphasis on discipleship time after time after time after time. Here in this chapter, we're going to put an emphasis on some of the principles of discipleship. Now, here's how we're going to break this chapter down. In verses 1 through 11, we're going to see doing good, right? The principle of doing good. Disciples of Christ should do good. In verses 12 through 16, we have the calling of the 12. We'll spend a little bit of time on those men. 17, 18, and 19, we have just a record of Jesus healing the multitude. Then we get back into these principles of discipleship. Verses 20 through 26, we see the proper attitude. Okay? And we especially see a lot of these things that are noted in Matthew chapter 5. And then verses 27 through 28, we have the proper action. Okay? Disciples, here's the attitude you're to have. Disciples, here's the actions that you're to be involved in. Then verses 39 through 45, we're going to see a proper examination. Okay? And it closes out the same way in Matthew chapter 7 with a proper foundation, with the parable of the rich and the wise builder. All right? So an emphasis here on the principles of discipleship. Verses 1 through 11, again, doing good. Let's read verses 1 through 11 together. Then we're going to come back and get into this verse, the first 5 verses, with the plucking of the grain on the Sabbath, then the healing on the Sabbath. Okay? Let's notice this. Luke 6, 1 through 11. And it came to pass on the second Sabbath after the first. Notice the detail that Luke is giving to Theophilus, to whom he's writing. That he went through the cornfields, and his disciples plucked the ears of corn and did eat, rubbing them in their hands. Now here's a question. How much property did Jesus own? All right, so why are they picking this corn and eating? What if I come through your property and I take some of your property and some of your food and I start eating your food? Is there anybody here that has a garden? You've had a garden. Miss Marguerite has had a garden. All right, Doug, y'all have a garden? All right. What's your favorite thing in the garden? Okra. What if you looked out one morning, there's me and Fred out there, we're picking that okra. Maybe we don't strip it down, but we're picking that okra. What are y'all doing? My wife loves some fried okra. We're having some okra tonight. Appreciate you raising this okra. It might not go over too well. You know what we're going to see right here? The Pharisees never say anything about them stealing corn. The law of Moses allowed travelers. You didn't have field properties marked off, fence posts, fencing, and all that. Was property owned? Yes. But paths, roadways, so to speak, we just went through fields. The parable of the sower, that wayside or the roadside, that seed that falls on the roadside, it sits on top of the ground. Why? Because that ground is beaten down. It's hard where people walk on it all the time. Okay? Law of Moses allowed as travelers, whether they were Jews or strangers, Gentiles, as they're traveling, hey, they can take that. Right? It's not going to hurt you if they just take what they need for that. So you see here, there's no charge of theft. All right, that's not what's going to happen here. Look at verse 2. And certain of the Pharisees said unto them, Why do ye that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day? Exactly right. Even when they gathered in the harvest, they were to leave a portion of that for those who had nothing. Okay, you've gone through and you've harvested. You've hired people to go through and harvest. The owner goes back, man, they missed quite a bit. Hey, y'all get back out here and get all of it. That was against the law of Moses. They go through, you harvest, and what's left, you leave it for those that turn off of there so they can eat it. They're working on the Sabbath day. They plucked and rubbed. They are preparing food on Sabbath day. That's where the problem was, okay? They're charging that as work. Just a quick note here. What stands out here with regard to these Pharisees and following Jesus? Is there anything that's kind of unusual about this? Here they are walking through a field. It's a Sabbath day. You can only walk so far on the Sabbath day. Here are these Pharisees doing what? What are they doing? They're following Jesus. They're watching Him. For what purpose? They're trying to get something on Him. What does that tell us? What is emphasized then here? The sinlessness of Jesus. He was in Jerusalem. He was in the temple. He was standing with great multitudes. He was teaching and preaching. There were these multitudes that followed Him around. When He was performing miracles, He also was teaching. They had all kinds of opportunities to see if He ever would contradict what He said, would contradict the law, would violate the law. They are following Him around seemingly day and night, trying to catch Him in something. An emphasis here, we don't need to let escape. There's an emphasis here on the sinless nature of Jesus. They had to watch Him like a hawk, try to catch Him in something. Okay? Again, Jesus, have you not read a little bit of irony there in verse 3? You've read it. I know you've read it, but you don't understand what's going on. All right, let's note here. First of all, Jesus does not concede to violating the law, Sabbath. He doesn't say, well, yeah, you're going to have to excuse us. We're a little hungry, so we're violating the law. But no, He does not concede to violating the law. The incident of the showbread and David taking the showbread is 1 Samuel 21. If you ever want to take a look at that. David comes at this particular time. He is being chased by Saul. His men are with him. They are hungry. What do? You're going to give them something to eat. Okay? Whenever you give someone that's hungry something to eat, what would we call that? If somebody comes to the church building sometime during the week and maybe Nina happens to be here or I happen to be here and they knock or they ring the doorbell and they talk about how they're in a difficult time, it's distressed times in their life right now, they don't have money, they wondered if maybe the church could help provide food. What do we call that? We call it benevolence. We call that benevolence. Now, benevolence is showing what? Compassion, mercy, okay, charity, love. And so David, in taking this, and it was given to him by the priest there at that time, 1 Samuel 21, there's a demonstration of mercy here for those in need. It is a benevolent act. Now, what was the showbread? Showbread was 12 loaves of bread that were laid out in two different rows. 6 loaves of bread like this, 6 loaves of bread like this, laid out. This in a display, okay? Showing, demonstrated in a display to God is really the idea there. What's called showbread. The showbread, there were 12 loaves that were baked fresh every day. And those 12 fresh loaves were put out on the table every morning. What happened to those other 12 old loaves, stale loaves? The priest ate those. What happened to those 12 loaves that day when David came? They were given to his men. All right, now let's go back to Luke chapter 6. David did when himself was an hungered, and they which were with him, and they did eat, says, that which is not lawful to eat for the priest, but they eat that alone. The priests alone were to eat that. Here's a question. Was David in violation of God's law? Is there a time when law is suspended? Some people would suggest here this is what Jesus is saying here, this is the law of necessity. There is a need, you fulfill that need, even if it's wrong to do so. Or some people call it situation ethics. Okay? Is it right to lie? Never right to lie. What if I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings? Well, I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, so I'm lying. Situation ethics, that's a very small example of that. This isn't the law of necessity. This is not a principle of situation ethics. This is the principle of a higher law suspends a lower law. What we have in 1 Samuel 21, what we have in Luke chapter 6, is the law of mercy supersedes, is higher than the law of the Sabbath. Now, we do this all the time. I'll give you an example of this. What's the speed limit on Main right out here? 50 to 55. It's 55. You come so far, it hits 50, then it goes to 45, then 40. What if I need to get to Cuero fast, and as I go, it's going to get up, 65, 70, 75. What if there's some type of an emergency, but the speed limit is 45? What am I going to do? I'm putting my flashers on. Then what am I going to do? I'm fixing to book it. Whatever my vehicle can do, I'm going. Listen, if I've got somebody here who's in my vehicle, they've had a heart attack, they've had a stroke, there's a broke arm, broke leg, there's some type of emergency, am I going to wait for the ambulance to get there? Maybe not. Might not be to where I can do that. So what do? I put my hazard lights on so everybody around me knows I'm in a vehicle and we've got an emergency situation here, and I go. Somebody said, wait a minute, you can't do 80 miles an hour. It's 45. But if I do 45, I'm not getting to the hospital and this person's going to die. So what do? Okay. The law says 45-mile speed zone. The emergency, the show of mercy, supersedes that law. We understand that completely. That's what Jesus is teaching here. The law of mercy supersedes whenever you have two laws that intersect. The lower law is superseded by the higher law. The higher law, the law of mercy, supersedes the law of showbread. In David's case, these men are starving. The law of mercy supersedes the law of showbread. The law of mercy supersedes the law of Sabbath. That's the case there that Jesus is teaching. Yes, sir. Okay, there's another good parallel. Are Christians to gather together on the first day of the week, partake of the Lord's Supper, worship God, give of our means? Yes, you do. I'm not. That, right. That's true. That's true. But it is another good parallel. Yeah, at first, if you come up on a, yeah, right, right. If I'm late, let's say that I'm late, my alarm doesn't go off this morning, I'm running late for Bible class. Is that an emergency situation and I can speed? No. Now, I might try to justify that. I know some who have try to justify those type of things. But I'm talking about an emergent situation, okay? An emergency situation. If there was an emergency situation, again, as James pointed out, we're heading to worship services. That's what my family, that's where I'm going. But I come upon an emergency. Here's someone that's been in an automobile accident. I'm right behind it. Maybe even nobody else there. I'm stopping. I'm helping. I'm making phone calls. I'm attending. The ambulance, the emergency, the folks arrive. I'm doing whatever I need to be doing until I'm dismissed and I can go. Okay. What if I'm late for worship services? What if I miss worship service? I come in right after. He hasn't violated that law of God. He's taken care of. Right. 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 Christians observe civil law, federal law, unless it's in violation of Christian principles or biblical law. Certainly. Just because something legal doesn't mean that it's biblical or right. Okay? All right, verses 6 through 11. I don't think we're going to have time to really get deep into this. But we have another instance on the Sabbath, and you see Jesus' antagonist again there, present. Okay? Verse 7, the Pharisees watched him. Okay, there we see again. This is watching closely or watching intently. Oftentimes, this particular Greek word that's translated, they watched, carries with it a sinister intent. Look at Luke chapter 20. And I know we've noted this already because this isn't the first time where it references that they are watching Jesus. Luke chapter 20 and verse 20. And they watched him. Here, the watching this is in Jerusalem, so the watching is, those that are watching are sent by basically the Sanhedrin. They watched him and sent forth spies, which should feign themselves fake to be just men. Okay, they're watching with a sinister intent. It's the same way in Luke chapter 6. They're watching. Their purpose is to do harm to Jesus, to his call. Okay, so they're watching him. There are 7 recorded instances of healings on the Sabbath in the gospel accounts. We have 2 in Mark. We have 2 in John. We have 3 occasions in Luke. Were there more occasions? Perhaps. But Jesus gave multiple opportunities for those that are watching him to find something wrong for them to do that. Okay? Verse 8, Jesus says to this man who has a withered hand, rise up and stand forth in the midst. All right, let's stop here. I think everybody's going to come in. We'll start here with this healing on the Sabbath next week. Picking up, again, Jesus showing mercy on the Sabbath.